Hello and welcome to the Americano Show on Spectator TV. I'm Matt McDonald. Freddie Gray is away this week. We are talking to Jon Levine from the New York Post about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and their joint interview on CNN on Thursday night. Jon, thank you so much for joining us. First off, I was just wondering what your overall thoughts were on Harris's performance last night.
Well, I mean, the bar for our discourse is now so low that, she got through it, and there was no obvious face plant, there was no obvious gaffe, and Tim Walz just kind of sat there smiling for most of it. But I don't really feel like she said anything. I feel like it's a great interview if you're cooking and it's on in the background and it's kind of white noise. But if you actually listen to it, as I did, she would be asked questions and then she would say, well, let me be very clear. And then she would go on a platitudinous mess where she wouldn't really explain anything. You know, do you still support fracking? Well, my values haven't changed. I mean, she actually did say that she's in favor of fracking. But she was very, on many different points, she just sort of would ramble about values and about vibes and about how we need to turn the page on the era. And she said very little, despite the interview being almost 30 minutes.
So the opening question that Dana Bash asked was, a fairly typical question that presidents and presidential candidates get asked. What would you do on day one?
Well, there are a number of things. I will tell you, first and foremost, one of my highest priorities is to do what we can to support and strengthen the middle class. When I look at the aspirations, the goals, the ambitions of the American people, I think that people are ready for a new way forward, in a way that generations of Americans have been fueled by hope and by optimism. I think, sadly, in the last decade, we have had in the former president someone who has really been pushing an agenda and in an environment that is about diminishing the character and the strength of who we are as Americans, really dividing our nation, and I think people are ready to turn the page on that.
So what would you do day one?
Day one, it's going to be about, one, implementing my plan for what I call an opportunity economy. I've already laid out a number of proposals in that regard, which include what we're going to do to bring down the cost of everyday goods, what we're going to do to invest in America's small businesses, what we're going to do to invest in families, for example, extending the child tax credit to $6,000 for families for the first year of their child's life to help them buy a car seat, to help them buy baby clothes, a crib. There's the work that we're going to do that is about investing in the American family around affordable housing, a big issue in our country right now. So there are a number of things on day one.
Like you say, she didn't really have a solid answer to that question. She, as a policy, she mentioned the child tax credit. Do you think that the approach, like maybe she's borrowing perhaps from Keir Starmer in Britain, which is be as vague as possible, and then hope that, people are going to vote for you because you're a blank slate and they dislike the other party or candidate more?
Partly. I think partly it's also practical. Like, she just kind of showed up in this job a few days ago, a month ago maybe. She hasn't had time to develop well thought out policies. And also, to what you just said, policies can be very dangerous. If you have, 100-page policy proposals on 25 different subjects and you put those on your website, that opens up opportunities for people to go through them and say, well, this is crazy, that's insane, that's not going to work, comes from this communist, whatever it may be. I think what you said is correct. She's trying to kind of be a tabula rasa where Americans can project what they want her to be. And then that will also give her a lot more freedom of movement if she does become president, because she doesn't have a lot of hard promises about different things to begin with. I don't know what she'll do on day one. I heard something about the price fixing plan because of the epidemic of price gouging, which not inflation, it's price gouging. There's really not a lot there. And by the way, the federal government making housing more affordable, that's another thing that was touched upon. It's exactly what led to the housing crisis in 2008. It's exactly the home ownership society, and they did it through multiple administrations. And they got people buying homes and investing in properties that weren't qualified to do so. and it overinflated that market. And I just feel like we're on a road, but we're just cycling back. I didn't really hear any new ideas at all.
So I suppose the risk is you can almost see a repeat of what happened with Biden, as in Biden ran and won in 2020 as the alternative to a chaos candidate. But then the unintended consequences of some of his major policy achievements have become the main issues of this cycle, right? So you have, the signing of the American Rescue Plan, which, I believe is, proven to be a main source of the inflation which America is currently facing right now. And so I suppose once again, you're presented this situation where you could have the unintended consequence of attempting to control prices at the grocery store being whether that could be the thing that scares the horses and upsets the economy once again in another fashion. I guess one thing which was a slight news line that emerged from the interview was Dana Bash asked if she would consider appointing a Republican to her cabinet, and she said, "Yes, I would," which isn't "yes, I will" or "I promise" or "I pledge to," but she expressed an interest in doing that, and she said, I've spent my career inviting diversity of opinion. What did you make of that? What kind of Republican do you think is likely to join a Harris-Walz cabinet?
It's not like a groundbreaking thing to have a Republican in a Democrat administration, or the opposite. President Obama had Bob Gates, I remember, as Secretary of Defense, and I think Bush Jr., I forget his name, but he was Secretary of Transportation. It was some Democrat. I forget his name, but it's not. I mean, these are bureaucratic jobs. I think I remember the Democrat. I forget his name, but I remember him being like, highways are not Democrat or Republican. They're just highways. A lot of these jobs are not really partisan jobs. They're like dog catcher in a small town. They're for specific purposes. And I'm not particularly moved or impressed that she'll consider a Republican for her cabinet. That doesn't indicate she's a moderate. That doesn't indicate that she wants to be bipartisan. I think there's no actual evidence that she wants to do any of that. And what evidence does exist suggests that she's a very, very progressive liberal, as she herself had said as late as 2019.
One other interesting point, obviously, Kamala and Tim Walz have both been kind of siloed off and away from the press for the majority of the last 6 weeks, right? As in, they've not really been taking questions. The last time where she kind of had a consequential interaction with the media was when she went out to defend Biden after his June 27th debate performance. And so you end up with...
She said he was fine.
Yeah, which clearly he is, which is why he's still the nominee, right? I mean, but so Dana Bash obviously had this kind of very limited period of time at which she has to, attempt to get responses to all of these various different news lines and news stories that have emerged over the past, 2 months, basically. One of those was, of course, the story about Tim Walz and his various misrepresentations with regard to his military record, whether, he discussed, his remarks where he refers to weapons that I held in conflict when obviously he served in the National Guard, but he only got as far as Italy rather than Afghanistan. And his response to that in one of his few answers was to basically attribute him misspeaking to him speaking passionately about topics that he really cares about.
Governor Walz, the country is just starting to get to know you. I want to ask you a question about how you've described your service in the National Guard. You said that you carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of this country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about our children being shot in schools and around guns. So I think people know me. They know who I am. They know where my heart is. And again, my record has been out there for over 40 years to speak for itself.
And the idea that you said that you were in war.
Yeah.
Did you misspeak, as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog. I'm not going to do that. And the one thing I'll never do is I'll never demean another member's service in any way. I never have, and I never will.
I was wondering, that's been certainly on the right in America, Tim Walz, and what he hasn't been entirely truthful on has been a major talking point for the last month. I'm wondering if you think that he did enough in that interview to bat down those concerns.
I have news for the right. People don't vote for vice president. So Tim Walz spoke about his military career incorrectly, and he did lie about his military career. I think there's no question about that. It's not going to matter. Number one, that's not an issue that affects my day to day, and no one votes for the vice president. This is a race between Kamala and Trump. A much bigger story is Kamala possibly misrepresenting her work at McDonald's.
Yeah.
Because it affects the principle, which I said is what Americans care about. And it goes to the same character issues about truthfulness and honesty that you alluded to with Tim Walz. And I would like to see that thread pulled a lot more. Because I think there's very limited mileage in attacking the vice president of either party. I don't think the J.D. Vance's weird stuff is going to stick either. Because, again, it's the vice president. And, okay, J.D. Vance is weird. What does that do for grocery prices? What does that do for the migrants that have taken over Randall's Island? I don't know. Here in New York, I don't know. So these are very surface level issues that you and I and Twitter people care about. I don't know that they'll resonate big picture.
Trump has kind of struggled to find his footing in knowing how to run against Kamala, and one of the major instances of him doing so was when he showed up to the National Association of Black Journalists conference and questioned whether Kamala is in fact black, saying, "I thought she was Indian," right? And Bash brought that up, and Harris kind of chose to respond by saying that Trump is using the same old tired playbook, right? Which I suppose we are supposed to extrapolate from that. It's like his birtherism with Obama, right? It's the only way that he can deal with. And did you get that as well, that we're kind of supposed to think of Kamala therefore as like an Obama successor in the same light?
Well, if we're supposed to think of Kamala as an Obama successor, we've fallen many, many pegs down from Obama, because Obama is one of the great communicators in the Democratic Party. I remember even his speech at the convention just blew everyone out of the water. And I mean, if he were to run again now, I think it'd be a no question. He'd probably still win. And not by the strength of any policy position. He's just so good at winning people over. I mean, I'm convinced he could sell you the wallet out of your own pants if you wanted to. I don't think Trump should necessarily be talking about how black Kamala is. I don't think that's necessarily productive. I know I'm not the first person to make that observation. Look, I mean, I think you run against Kamala as you might run against Biden, with a little less focus on the Sleepy Joe and the cognitive issues. There's two issues in this race. Maybe three issues: the economy and the border. Those are the two that favor Trump. And the third, I would say there's a third, is abortion. And that favors her. But Trump is beating her by double digits in every single poll, if you look at the crosstabs on the economy and the border, for who is better able to handle the crisis on both of those fronts. And she is beating him on abortion. So it'll be a big question over when Americans go to vote, what do they prioritize more? If you're very concerned about the economy, but you're also very concerned about the abortion, what is your priority issue there? And we don't have an answer for that yet, but we will in November.
I'm glad you raised the kind of Biden's, mental acuity issues, should we call them, because that was a topic addressed late on in the interview, where Dana Bash effectively asks, like, what did you know and when, and then Kamala responds by basically talking about how great a public servant Joe Biden was for 3.5 minutes, and then that question, yeah, not really followed up on.
No.
Do you expect Kamala to be held to account on that question at any point?
Yeah, I do. Maybe at the debate, Trump can hold her to account, but he is the only one. She obviously will not do an interview with Fox News. I doubt she'll do an interview with Spectator or with any institution or publication that deviates ever so slightly from the prevailing line. So if she does another interview, it'll be maybe with like a Rachel Maddow type figure or someone. And no, the short answer is no one is ever going to hold this woman to account except Trump at the debate. And that is his most important task. And it will not be a walk in the park. She's not Joe Biden. This woman is a prosecutor. She knows how to debate. And I saw what I could glean from last night is when she gets questions at the debate, she's going to glide right through them. She's going to cut right through them like butter. Like not a real answer, but also not a mistake. And it's going to be up to Trump to prosecute and say, you didn't answer that. Da, 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 da. And the mics are going to be muted now. So he's going to have to do it in a structured and orderly way, no interrupting. But the debate is critically important for Trump to make that case.
We would love to have Vice President Harris on Spectator TV. I'll just say that right now.
I'm sure she's watching.
Yeah, clearly she watches every episode. I was wondering what you thought about the brief kind of Israel-Palestine section, where obviously I think, you know, she's got some people don't really know how to read Kamala. I think there's a suspicion on the left that she will be more sympathetic to the Palestinians in Gaza than Biden would. But then at the same time, her comments yesterday, I feel like were more, she ruled out the possibility of, you know, any kind of arms embargo or sending fewer weapons to Israel. I wondered what you made of that response.
She's just like a miasma of different positions, because it's like you've got her old progressive views, and those are all in the toilet now. And she's got a whole bunch of new moderate views. And, you know, about Israel, okay, yeah, I mean, she sounded really good on Israel in the interview. But I know, because I read the news every day, that she has been a constant force in this administration trying to push President Biden to be tougher on Israel, to talk more about the innocent Palestinians and the innocent Palestinians, and to basically be more sympathetic to the concerns of Hamas. And she called for a ceasefire before President Biden. So I see her actions in this administration as what she would probably pursue if she is president. And they're considerably to the left of Joe Biden. They're much more sympathetic to Hamas. And I mean, I just think, like, if you've been paying attention, I don't know how you can watch what she said on CNN last night and believe her.
To kind of continue that thought, like, what do you think that means that Harris' foreign policy towards Iran would look like?
Well, you know, it's funny. The Democrats are kind of wedded to Iran in a primal way because of the Iran deal. They did this. Obama invested enormous amounts of political capital in the Iran deal and a broader rapprochement with Iran in an attempt to effect a kind of realignment of interests in the Middle East. And remember, it's not just Obama, it's also Biden, since he was vice president at the time, which means, like, it's been Biden's policy to never totally detach the United States from Iran, which makes it Kamala's policy because she's vice president right now. So she's inheriting a lot of Iran baggage. And I don't know that as long as Obama is still, like, basically the eminence grise of the party, that Democrats can ever really decouple themselves from Iran. There will always be this feeling of, oh, we could have done it if not for Trump, and we could still do it. And so, you know, the way to deal with Iran, I think, and I think most people not wedded to the Iran deal, is you need to isolate this country, and you basically do a deal between Israel and the Sunni Arabs, and you contain it, to use an old Soviet term. And I think, and that effectuates long-term, you know, pressure on the regime, which could maybe lead to its collapse and something more favorable to U.S. and Western interests. But I mean, that's not the view of Democrats. The view of Democrats is you win over Iran by giving them stuff, by enriching their population, and by extension, enriching the Ayatollahs and the, you know, Revolutionary Guard and all those forces. And it's just wrong. And you know, they're in the streets chanting "Death to America" every single day. And that won't change if suddenly they can afford sports cars and have Whole Foods. I don't think that's changing. And I think it's a terrible error at the heart of Democratic foreign policy thinking. And I think Harris will probably buy into it should she be president. And she will continue efforts to make rapprochement with Iran. And it will continue to be wrong. And it will continue to be dangerous. And it will continue not to work.
I don't know. The Whole Foods mac and cheese is pretty good, though. That could end wars, as far as, you know.
It's a broader issue of neoliberal thinking, which is, oh, if only people have money, they'll become pro-Western. They'll suddenly become democratic. I mean, the right also has people that subscribe to this. It's why we've been so wrong about China for many, many years. Which, oh, if China becomes wealthy, they'll obviously become democratic. They'll obviously become pro-Western. And you've seen the exact opposite. The regime that's been enriched has doubled down on censorship, and they use all that capital to oppress their population even more. And so you got to understand, democracy is like a very Western concept. Greece, Enlightenment, what we have here, it's very unusual. If you and I have a disagreement, it's like, okay, whatever. In other parts of the world, it's like, if you and I have a disagreement, I have to kill you, or you have to kill me. And that's just much more of the prevailing view. The fact that we can like talk about things and no one has to kill each other is very much not a natural way of human behavior. And it's something that we get because we're inheritors of Enlightenment tradition.
Finally, I just wanted to touch on an old friend of yours, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who obviously
Heard of him.
made the decision to drop out in swing states where possible, and then kind of endorse and back Trump. I was wondering what effect you think that could have on the race, and talk a bit about RFK as a phenomenon, because obviously he's kind of, as a success, he's been a success story of people's lack of faith in institutions, right? Whether that's public health or social media or the news. And obviously he has a number of fairly wacky opinions, which I believe you can speak to. So maybe tell us a bit about the story you broke on him, and then also what you think the effect of him lining up behind Trump will be.
Well, it's funny. RFK Jr. is not a young man. I think he's 70. He's been around a very long time, and he's been singing a lot of the same songs on vaccines and other issues for a very long time. It's only recently that Americans are giving him a second look, and that's because of all the lies we were told by our official institutions about coronavirus. And this is why, when government lies to you and when the official institutions lie to you, it's so devastating, because it allows people with alternative views who might not necessarily be grounded in reality to rise up and say, look, I told you so. When I was in New York, I'm in New York. When Robert F. Kennedy was in New York, they organized a dinner between him and a bunch of reporters. It was an on-the-record dinner. And I didn't even want to go. I had a migraine that day. I was tired. And the organizer was like, please come. Everyone wants to see you. And I said, I'll only go if I could sit next to him. Because I've been at a lot of these dinners, and they're at the other side of the table. You can't even ask him anything. And I didn't just want to get a question in during the question time. I wanted to speak to him, like when we were eating. And the organizer was like, sure, I can make that happen. So flash forward, we're on the Upper East Side here in Manhattan, and he's talking a lot of stuff. It was mostly him monologuing about different things. And, when he speaks, it's almost like you're just breathing in nitrous oxide, because he's just saying one, like, yeah, man, the moon landing, totally fake. He didn't talk about the moon landing. I don't even remember what he was talking about. But I do remember specifically him getting a question about the coronavirus, which is a subject he likes to discourse on. And he said, and I will paraphrase some version of, well, we know it was a bioweapon engineered in a lab, and it's very interesting that it was designed so that it would be deadlier for black people, and it would not be as deadly for Chinese people and for Ashkenazi Jews. And everyone's just kind of rolling with this. And I sort of like snapped out of it. And there's a video of this, which the organizer of the event sent to me for the express purpose of publishing for this on-the-record dinner. And when I asked for it, and you can see my face kind of have this revelation, like, what did I just hear? And then I got the tape back, and it was what I just heard. Now, I ask you a question. Let's assume it was a bioweapon, and the Chinese were creating a bioweapon. I understand why the Chinese might want to engineer a bioweapon that didn't hit Chinese people. I get that. What I don't understand is why the Chinese would want to engineer a bioweapon that would spare Ashkenazi Jews. Now, people say, oh, you falsely impugned him as being anti-Semitic. No, I did not. And I don't know. I don't think Robert F. Kennedy is anti-Semitic. I do believe that he has heard things and has been in environments, and this is clearly a theory or an idea he picked up somewhere that certainly has an anti-Semitic origin, because I can't think of a reason why the Chinese would create a bioweapon that spared Jewish people, unless there was some conspiracy that we were... By the way, Who were the first people to get the vaccine? The first people to get it, Israel. Israel vaccinated their society before anyone. They were doing 2 and 3 when we were still on 1. So, certainly not an action you take if your people have natural immunity.
So how helpful do you think that is to Trump, though? The RFK and the RFK kind of like crunchy machine, right?
I think that there are RFK voters out there. And to the extent that, I don't think someone who's voting for Trump is going to say, I'm not voting for him now because RFK is backing him. I think he'll probably bring over some number of voters. And these are very, very tight states in many cases. You need every vote you can get. So I do think it's I don't know how helpful, but it is certainly helpful. And it's certainly better than not having his endorsement. I agree.
Jon, thank you so much. This was great.